My younger brother scored a 0 on his exam and didn't dare call our parents. So he dragged me, his college graduate big brother, to school instead. "Dad, this is my homeroom teacher," he said timidly, clutching my sleeve. I froze when I saw the woman standing across from me, her icy gaze piercing through me. This couldn't be. Wasn't she my ex-girlfriend from 3 years ago, the one I broke up with? I forced myself to greet her. "Hi, what a surprise." "Not much of a surprise," she replied coldly. "Though I didn't expect that 3 years after we broke up you'd already have a son this big." My brother looked up at me with wide eyes, utterly shocked. At that moment both of us were screaming the same thing internally. We're doomed. Half an hour later, my mom arrived. She shot my brother a withering glare before marching into the office for a conversation with the teacher. That night, my brother received a team effort spanking from both my parents, while I received a friend request from none other than my ex, Victoria. I had noticed Victoria, the campus' untouchable beauty, ever since I started college. After pursuing her relentlessly for a year, I finally managed to win her over, making it onto the university's infamous list of legendary simp stories. We dated passionately for 3 years, and everyone thought we'd get married after graduation. Instead, I broke up with her. Leaving her heartbroken, prompting her to study abroad in the US, I became a campus legend for that, albeit not in a good way. The friend request came with a message, "You left your water bottle in my office." Attached was a photo of the bottle joggling my memory. Earlier that day, when my mom was chasing my brother around, I must have accidentally left it behind while trying to mediate. "Could you pass it to my brother tomorrow and have him bring it home for me?" I replied. Her response was instant. "No. You come get it yourself. It was a gift from me after all." I stared at the screen, dumbfounded. That water bottle had been a gift from her back in our dating days, and I'd treasured it for years. Great. The heartbreaker image I'd worked so hard to cultivate was now completely shattered. The next day I went to the school. Victoria was seated in her office, wearing a simple white blouse and grading papers with a pen in her delicate, slender fingers. She looked serene, just as I remembered her from our first meeting, quietly sitting there, yet commanding everyone's attention. "Bro, what are you standing there for?" My brother's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. Victoria looked up, hearing the commotion, and I suddenly realized a group of little girls had surrounded my brother, staring curiously at me. "Did Miss V call you in to scold me again?" my brother asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His awareness of his troublemaking tendencies was almost admirable. Before I could respond, the little girls started chattering. "Miss V, Leo was being a bully." I blinked, stunned. My brother was only 7 years old. How could he possibly be causing this kind of trouble already? "No, I wasn't," Leo protested, practically hopping with frustration. "I was just kidding." But the girls were adamant. "He said he's going to marry us when he grows up." The girls looked up at us with teary, accusing eyes. I figured I should say something to appear like a responsible older brother. "Leo," I began solemnly, "you can't act like this. You're a student. Your main focus should be on studying, not on love and relationships." Victoria chuckled softly behind me. I froze, suddenly remembering that someone had once said those exact words to me. Ethan, she had told me back in the day. "You're a student. You should focus on your academics instead of thinking about dating all the time." I had just quoted her own lecture to my brother, right in front of her. "You two really are brothers," she commented dryly, before reassuring the girls and sending them on their way. My brother and I stood silently to the side, both looking as meek as scolded kids. Victoria walked back into her office, grabbed my water bottle and handed it to me. Then, picking up her bag, she said, "Let's grab dinner and catch up." Under normal circumstances, the prospect of dinner would have made my brother and me jump with excitement, but faced with Victoria, my little brother and I sat quietly at the dinner table, especially him. He only dared to pick up the food directly in front of him with his fork. Maybe it was because I was the one who initiated the breakup back then. And word had it that someone once saw Victoria walking into a bridal shop to look at wedding dresses. Yet I still ended things with her. Now, sitting across from Victoria, All I could feel was guilt. "So how have you been in the US?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Not bad. I've been busy with school every day. At least no one's pestering me about relationships anymore." I buried my face in my plate, too ashamed to respond. Luckily, Victoria didn't dwell on herself and instead brought up Leo's academics. My little brother stared at me with tearful eyes, visibly upset. "Sorry, little Z," I thought to myself. "Your big brother's trying not to make this even more awkward." After the meal, I refused Victoria's offer to drive us home. Instead, I insisted we take the subway. My little brother grabbed my arm and we bolted like rabbits. Once we were on the subway, gasping for air while holding onto the handrails, he looked up at me. "Bro, is Miss V really your ex-girlfriend?" I nodded. "Wow, Miss V really liked you, didn't she? She used to do whatever you said, right?" I thought about it carefully. She probably did like me back then. As for doing whatever I said, well, that was true to some extent. Seeing me nod, little Z got even more excited. "That's great. Why don't you two get back together?" I stared at him, wide-eyed, unable to believe that a 7-year-old was saying such things. Nearby passengers gave us curious looks, and I instantly regretted taking the subway today. Seriously, that way if Miss V treats me unfairly, I can complain to you. "And how exactly has she treated you unfairly?" I asked. "She always calls on me to answer questions in class, and she checks my homework super thoroughly." I stayed silent for a while before explaining to him that this was just her way of paying attention to him. "No, it's not. Are you going to help me or not? Aren't I your brother?" "No, you're my little troublemaker," I replied, sighing. After some thought, I gave him a brief rundown of my history with Victoria. He remained quiet for the rest of the ride. But just as we were about to exit the subway station, he suddenly shouted, "So it's because you dumped Miss V that she doesn't like me now?" Great. All my explanations were for nothing. This kid's brain was wired differently. When we got home, little Z's eyes were red. He flung his backpack aside and ran straight into his room, bursting into tears. "What's wrong? Don't you usually get excited when your big brother picks you up?" my mom asked, puzzled as she walked into his room. A moment later, I heard him wailing loudly, "Mom, now I know what they mean by one person's mistake affects everyone." Thankfully, his sadness only lasted 3 days. On the 3rd day, he came home proudly holding a workbook with a big thumbs up drawn on it. "Miss V said I've been doing great on my homework lately, so she gave me this as a reward," he announced, beaming. As he showed it off, my eyes lingered on the simple thumbs up sketch. It was a drawing I had once taught Victoria to make. Back then, we were studying together in the library, but I couldn't keep up with her genius-level thinking. After a while, I got so sleepy that I had to distract myself to avoid drooling on my books. So I started doodling a thumbs up on her notebook. "Stop doodling on my notes," she had scolded me. I glared at her in mock annoyance. "I'm teaching you something. One day when you're a teacher, you can use this to reward your students." Victoria had simply chuckled, letting me fill her notebook with thumbs-up sketches, and now she'd mastered it. I handed the workbook back to little Z, who was staring at me curiously. "Bro, why don't you just get back together with Miss V? You don't have a girlfriend anyway, and lots of teachers at my school like her." "How do you know that?" "Everyone knows. The English teacher blushes every time he talks about her," little Z said proudly. "But I still think Miss V should be with you. If people ask, I can say she's my future sister-in-law. How cool would that be?" Ah, so it was all about his own vanity. I covered his mouth and told him to go do his homework. After that, little Z didn't bring it up again. I thought he'd forgotten about it, until a week later when I got a message from Victoria. "Leo told me you haven't dated anyone all these years because you're still waiting for me." What a lie. It's so easy to spread rumors, but clearing them up is like running a marathon. When I got home, I immediately gave little Z a good scolding. He clutched the back of his head, yelling, "But it's true. You haven't dated anyone because you're still waiting for Miss V." I suddenly froze. If I denied it, wouldn't that expose the sad reality that no one's been interested in me all these years? "Bro, just say yes to Miss V already. She was so happy to hear you're single. How do you know she's happy? Are you a mind reader? He snorted and turned his head away. I just know. This afternoon she let us watch a movie in class. She never does that. Was it about dental hygiene by any chance? How'd you know? I took several deep breaths to calm myself. Because today's World Oral Health Day. Honestly, I'm amazed at what goes through this kid's brain. Yet little Z remained firm in his belief, muttering about it constantly. Later that night I lay in bed staring at Victoria's message. After much hesitation, I finally replied, "Not really. Plenty of people, like dozens, have pursued me. I just haven't found the right one yet." After hitting send, I tossed my phone aside. 3 seconds later, a message popped up on my phone. "Haven't found anyone more suitable than me yet?" I froze. Damn it, America really does change people. The high and mighty, untouchable flower of the past was now throwing fastballs straight at me. "I always thought you were waiting for me, after all. You were the one who said you'd love me forever back then." I stared at Victoria's message, my emotions a swirling mix of bitterness and nostalgia. It had been years. "Just think of it as me making empty promises," I replied. But I had believed her words back then. And those 4 simple words, "I believed you," kept me tossing and turning all night. The next morning I showed up to work with dark circles under my eyes. My colleagues passing by my desk looked utterly baffled. "We don't even have any projects going on right now. What on earth kept you up all night? Don't tell me it's about a girl?" I forced a weak smile. One of them patted my shoulder with a knowing look. "Listen to bro's advice. Pick someone who loves you more than you love them. Like that girl Sophia from HR. She's been chasing you for weeks now." It was almost suspicious how hard my colleague was pushing me towards Sophia, as if she'd been bribed to play matchmaker. I had just politely turned down the idea when Sophia herself appeared, shyly fidgeting. "Zach, are you busy today? Want to grab dinner after work? I remember seeing your post about wanting to try out barbecue. A new place just opened nearby." I was ready to decline, but the word barbecue made me hesitate. I did want to try the new spot. "It's just dinner," I thought to myself, like eating with a buddy. It seemed harmless enough, and refusing at this point felt awkward. So after work I went with her to the restaurant. The smoky aroma filled the air as I shamelessly devoured the grilled meat. "Zach, I've always wanted to ask, what's your type?" My mind immediately conjured up an image of Victoria. Elegant, distant, like moonlight just out of reach. The kind of person who catches your eye and makes your heart race at first sight. "Honestly, I do have someone I like," I admitted, though I hate to admit it. Victoria has always been my ideal, my white moonlight. Sophia fell silent for a long moment before forcing a bittersweet smile and urging me to eat more. By the time we finished dinner, it was nearly dark. I offered to walk her home, but just as we stepped out of the restaurant, someone called my name. Turning around, I saw little Z holding hands with Victoria. Both of them wore expressions as stormy as a brewing thundercloud. "You said you'd pick me up today," little Z accused. Ah, crap. I'd completely forgotten. Back home, little Z tossed his backpack aside and stormed off to his room, sulking. "You two have been at odds a lot lately," my mom remarked. I scratched my head awkwardly. She wasn't wrong. I had promised to pick him up from school but got too busy and forgot. Apparently, he and Victoria had waited for me at school for 2 hours before she decided to take him home herself. Then, just as they were crossing the street, they saw me coming out of the barbecue restaurant. After finally calming him down, I sent Victoria a message, "Thanks for helping out today." I completely forgot. "Too busy having dinner with another woman?" she replied almost immediately. Her words, combined with the icy look she had given Sophia earlier, painted a clear picture in my mind. "It was just a colleague," I explained unnecessarily. "I needed her advice on some work stuff." I didn't even know why I felt the need to clarify things to Victoria. It felt pointless, like drawing legs on a snake. Later that night, after washing up and lying in bed, I got another message from her, whatever. "It's your life, not mine." She was right. We weren't together anymore. Who I dined with was none of her business. Yet her words sank into my chest like a stone. robbing me of another night's sleep. In the days that followed, Victoria stopped messaging me entirely, and Sophia kept her distance as well. My life returned to its usual monotony, until a month later, when little Z came home clutching his report card. His latest grades had my mom grinning from ear to ear. She even rewarded him with 2 drumsticks at dinner. But instead of celebrating, he sighed and placed the drumsticks into my bowl. That night, he quietly pushed open my bedroom door. "Big Z," he whispered, almost in tears. "Can you start dating Miss V again? I can't take it anymore. She checks every single one of my assignments and calls on me to answer questions every class. I'm exhausted. She's just trying to help you improve," I said, trying to console him. But before I could say more, he had already fallen asleep on my bed, worn out. Could it really be that bad? Over the next 2 weeks, I watched as little Z grew visibly more tired each day, even nodding off at the dinner table. That's when I realized how serious the situation was. I decided to message Victoria. "Miss V, Leo's grades were great this time. Thank you for all your guidance. But he's been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately. Could you ease up on him a little?" The message was polite and professional, leaving no room for criticism. Feeling quite satisfied with myself, I sent it off. That afternoon, I received her response. "He has great potential. He should stay focused on his studies." Her words annoyed me. Wasn't Leo focused enough already? He didn't even watch TV anymore, burying himself in homework as soon as he got home. Replaying the events in my mind, I couldn't help but wonder, was she being so strict with him because of what happened between us? "Do you treat other students this way too, or is this just personal?" I asked. "Are you questioning my professionalism as a teacher?" "Not at all, just stating facts," I muttered under my breath. Victoria's really getting petty these days. She didn't reply after that. It was late evening when I got home from work and saw little Z sulking with a long face. "Miss V scolded me today," he said, obviously upset. "Can't you two stop causing trouble for me? Why do I have to suffer for your issues?" "Why? Victoria wouldn't give you a hard time, would she? Whatever happened to her teaching ethics from back in the day? Did she leave them all behind in America?" I pulled out my phone, ready to demand an explanation, but before I could text her, a message popped up. "He's been a bit more focused in class lately, but only during lectures. The rest of the time, he's playing card games. I asked around, and apparently he's even sneaking off to play at night. It's gotten to the point where he's skipping meals and sleep to play." My heart sank and I stormed into little Z's room. Sure enough, under his mattress, I found an entire set of Ultraman trading cards. Judging by the sheer number of them, he must have spent every penny he had on these. Little Z stood off to the side, looking like a scared little quail. Victoria sent another message. "I've already talked to him. His card game obsession is now affecting his rest. Maybe you could step in at home. Also, I conduct random name-calling during class. There's no such thing as focused attention on one student." I felt a wave of shame wash over me. Did she really think I was the kind of person to accuse her of bias? This was bad, really bad. Frustrated, I called little Z over, gave him a good scolding, and confiscated all his Ultraman cards. But as the evening wore on, I started to suspect Victoria might be upset with me. She hadn't replied to the apology text I sent her. In the past, when she was mad, she'd ignore my messages too. Maybe she felt hurt, thinking her ethics were being questioned. I sent her a few more texts, but she didn't respond. Eventually, I decided to apologize in person. The next day, while picking up little Z, I headed to her office. Victoria was there, wearing her usual simple white shirt, grading papers with an air of elegance that made her stand out effortlessly. On the way to the school, I overheard a couple of younger girls talking about how Miss V from 2nd grade, class 3, was super pretty. It reminded me of college, how beauty standards are cultivated from a young age. Seeing her like this brought back memories of when we first met. It was during a school club event. Someone mentioned there was a stunningly beautiful student, and I was curious. One glance at her and I was smitten. "Do you need something?" Her voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I had been staring and got caught. Sorry about earlier, I said, trying to sound sincere. I acted impulsively without understanding the full picture. I'm here to apologize. All right, I accept. That was it? So simple? I had spent half an hour rehearsing what to say, and now it was over before I even got started. Let me buy you dinner to make it up to you, I offered. No need. I've got plans later. I hesitated, about to say more, but just then, a knock on the door interrupted us. Miss V, the meeting's starting. The speaker was a strikingly handsome teacher, exuding gentlemanly charm. Victoria left with him. On the way home, little Z grabbed my hand. You saw him, right? That's Mr. Zhang, our English teacher. Yeah, he's good-looking. Mr. Zhang isn't just good-looking, he likes Miss V too. If you want to win her over, you'd better act fast. I thought for a moment before crouching down to meet his gaze. Victoria and I used to date, but that's in the past. We're not getting back together. Please don't bring this up again. It's not good if others hear about it. Little Z nodded, half understanding. But why? Miss V really likes you. Don't you like her too? Where did you get that idea? Annoyed, I stood up and hurried him home. I'm serious, he insisted, keeping up with my stride. When we go to her office and it's not about school, she tells us to play on our own. But one time, I mentioned you. She listened for ages and even asked me questions about you. She only sent me back when class started. Does Victoria still have feelings for me? That thought lingered in my mind for a long time. I remembered the day we broke up, a rainy day so cliché it felt like a movie. The downpour was even heavier than the one in that infamous breakup scene in The Grandmaster. Victoria sat across from me, nervously wringing her hands. When I told her it was over, disbelief clouded her face. Afterward, I spent the entire day at the airport, watching planes take off and land, convincing myself that this was the right path for her. Victoria was destined for greater things in America. I thought she'd stay there for good. I never expected to run into her again 3 years later. From that day on, I stopped picking up little Z from school. After much deliberation, I deleted Victoria's contact information. Seeing her name pop up only unsettled me. It was better to cut ties completely. My mom started setting me up on blind dates. Little Z glanced at me but said nothing about Victoria anymore. For some reason, my love life suddenly became a whirlwind of activity. Before I knew it, December had come. One day, little Z pulled me aside as soon as he got home. Do you really not like Miss V? He asked out of the blue. It had been so long since he last brought her up that I was caught off guard. Why are you asking? Mr. Zhang bought a huge bouquet of flowers today, he said. I heard he's planning to take them to Miss V's house. That handsome teacher? I tried to sound casual. They'd make a good match. I didn't say anything else, but that night, I couldn't sleep. The next day, I came down with a fever so bad I had to call in sick and stay in bed all day. Just as I was drifting off in the evening, I heard loud noises coming from next door. It wasn't exactly quiet hours yet, but still, have some respect for the neighbors. I opened my door, ready to give whoever it was a piece of my mind. But the words caught in my throat when I saw who it was. The door across the hall was wide open. Standing in the stairwell, directing movers who were carrying in a sofa, was none other than Victoria. Hello there, she said, smiling. My neighbor, Victoria, just moved in next door. That very evening, she came over to borrow a bottle of soy sauce. The one who reacted the most to this was my little brother. After dinner, he dramatically slid on his knees in front of me, pleading, "Bro, I'm begging you, just get together with Miss V. Otherwise, with her living next door, I'll feel like I'm being watched every single day." I shrugged and told him there wasn't much I could do about it. Victoria borrowed soy sauce that day and toilet paper the next. Eventually, even my mom started murmuring, "Miss V always seems so meticulous. How come she's so scatterbrained when it comes to daily life?" Something didn't feel right to me, but Victoria always kept her distance socially. She'd only ever give a polite nod when we met. The only one truly affected was my little brother, who wore a long face every day and didn't dare venture outside to play with other kids anymore. As the weather grew colder and Christmas approached, the neighborhood began decorating for the season. Though my brother's school didn't officially celebrate Christmas, Rumor had it that the teachers were having a dinner party that day, so his tutoring session was canceled. That afternoon he messaged me, asking me to come home early for hot pot. Near the end of my workday, our company decided to splurge a little and gave everyone a flower to take home. It wasn't much, but at least it saved us from going home empty-handed and feeling awkward seeing all the couples around. Holding the flower, I hummed a tune as I made my way home. Just as I reached the ground floor, I saw Victoria throwing out the trash. Wasn't she supposed to be at a dinner party? I greeted her and was about to head upstairs when she suddenly grabbed my hand. "Are you celebrating Christmas?" she asked. Her question left me baffled, but I nodded. "It's a holiday after all. Just joining in the fun. We're having hot pot later." Victoria let go of my hand, her face pale. She still dressed the same as always, choosing style over warmth. I was about to remind her to bundle up when my phone rang. It was obviously my little brother urging me to come home. Forget it. Why should I still care about these things after we've broken up? Answering the call, I headed upstairs. Our family gathered around for a warm Christmas meal, enjoying the hot pot together. Halfway through, we realized we'd run out of oyster sauce. As a devoted fan of oyster sauce, I couldn't stand it, so I immediately put on my shoes and went out to buy more. The streets were awash in red and festive cheer. Carrying the oyster sauce, I hummed as I walked home. I glanced up at Victoria's place. It was dark. She must have gone out. Sighing softly, I went upstairs. Just as I stepped out of the elevator and reached for my keys, a slender hand suddenly yanked me into the dimly lit stairwell. Before I could react, I raised the bottle of oyster sauce defensively, but another hand grabbed hold of it. "It's me," a familiar voice said, and I realized it was Victoria. "What are you doing? You scared me," I said. The stairwell was dim, and Victoria had cornered me against the wall. The faint smell of alcohol lingered in the air. "Have you been drinking?" I asked. "Merry Christmas," she replied, her words slightly off. One of her cold fingers brushed against my cheek, sending a shiver down my spine. "Didn't you say you were celebrating Christmas?" "Why are you back home?" she asked. "Can I spend it with my family?" I replied. Victoria's grip was surprisingly strong. I couldn't move an inch. "Why did you delete me from your contacts?" she demanded. Only now did she notice. I rolled my eyes. "You never replied to my messages, so I deleted you. If there's anything urgent, Leo can contact my mom. Then why did you delete me 3 years ago? I sent you so many messages. You didn't reply to a single one, and then you deleted me." I fell silent. Why bring up things from the past? "So you just forgot everything?" she continued. "Forgot the promises you made to me? Forgot everything we did together?" Victoria suddenly cupped my face, forcing me to look into her eyes. "How can you be so passionate when you like someone, and then just toss them aside without a second thought when you don't? Zach, sometimes I really wonder if you ever truly liked me. What were those 3 years to you? Did you actually love me? Or was I just something to spice up your college life?" I had never heard Victoria speak with such a tremor in her voice. Usually so proud and distant, she always carried an air of cold elegance that made people hesitate to approach her. "Say something," she demanded. "You can't even say a word to me now?" She threw herself into my arms, her familiar scent and warmth overwhelming me. My mind went blank as I instinctively wrapped my arms around her waist. "Zach, why did you treat me this way? It's been 3 years. Every day I've been asking myself what I did wrong for you to pass such a harsh judgment on me without a word." Her voice echoed in the empty stairwell, filled with a haunting sorrow. "I've gone to church countless times, praying before God, hoping you'd forgive me for whatever I did wrong. I even thought if there really were devils in this world, I'd make a deal with them. I'd give up everything just to be with you again. 3 years isn't a short time, but it's not long either." Listening to Victoria's words, tears streamed down my face. I had been in agony too. "Tell me, please, tell me what I did wrong. I'm willing to change. I can't accept you being with someone else," she said, clutching me tightly. A tear fell onto my face. "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say after a long pause, but she shook her head. "I don't want to hear sorry. I just want us to start over, Victoria whispered, burying her face in my neck. I felt her trembling body and gently patted her back. All right, I said softly. As the words left my lips, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The weight in my heart finally lifted. Victoria suddenly raised her head and stared blankly for a long time. Really? This time you won't leave me again, right? I won't. My eyes reddened as I looked at the person in front of me. Since the moment you came back, I've wanted to be with you. But I was afraid he wouldn't forgive me. Afraid I'd be rejected, just like the way I rejected her back then. When I came home with a bottle of oyster sauce, Little Z's stomach was already bulging from eating too much. Bro, why did you take so long to come back? Hurry, I saved some shrimp for you. I sat at the table and started wolfing down the food. Suddenly, Little Z stared at me. Bro, why is your lip swollen? I froze for a moment. Earlier, I got too carried away in the stairwell, and during the kiss, I lost control of myself. Nothing. The hot pot was a bit spicy. I quickly brushed it off. Later that night, as I was about to sleep, Little Z suddenly burst into my room. Bro, are you dating Miss V? Startled, I sat up in bed and asked him how he knew. I went down to play with Jack earlier and saw her. She even bought me snacks and said I could call her sis outside of school from now on. I couldn't believe Victoria was such a blabbermouth. After finally shooing Little Z off to bed, I didn't expect the news to spread to the whole family by the next morning. At breakfast, my mom's piercing gaze fixed on me as I ate. Are you dating Miss V from across the street? I choked, spitting out the milk in my mouth. How do you know? Your brother told me. I knew there was something going on between you two. My mom raised her eyebrows knowingly. Miss V doesn't look like she's short of money. Why would she live in this old neighborhood and keep coming over here? It must be because of you. I buried my head in my bowl, too afraid to say anything, while my mom wore a smug grin, clearly pleased with herself. That evening, when I went to pick up Little Z, Victoria insisted on coming along. As the three of us climbed up the stairs, we bumped right into my mom. Back already? Victoria, why don't you stay for dinner? Classic mom, she had already changed how she addressed her in just one day. Sure, Auntie, Victoria replied sweetly without hesitation. During dinner, Little Z looked visibly distressed. If I'd known, I wouldn't have played matchmaker. Eating with a teacher feels so awkward. Unfortunately, Victoria, who had just finished washing the dishes, overheard him. Seeing her sly smile, I knew Little Z was doomed. Under Victoria's supervision, Little Z managed to score decent grades on his finals. But his joy lasted only 2 days before turning into despair. Victoria started visiting every few days, and as someone who never did his homework until the last minute, Little Z finally felt the pressure. After New Year's, he began throwing tantrums. Bro, move out, don't let Miss V come here anymore, I can't take it. But it was too late. For the next 4 years of elementary school, he would be under Victoria's watchful eye. As the weather grew warmer, I hurried home clutching a new box of ice cream, only to spot a familiar woman at the entrance to the apartment complex. The woman took off her sunglasses and smiled faintly. Got a moment? Let's talk. It was Victoria's mother. I'd heard she was a board member of a publicly listed company. The last time we met was before I graduated, when she came to my school to find me. You and Victoria aren't right for each other. She won't go abroad for her master's because of you. If you truly love her, let her go. Don't hold her back. I had always imagined Victoria and I as the protagonists of a love story, overcoming all obstacles to be together. But reality was cruel. She could have had a better life, but she stopped because of me. I feared that 20 years later, our love would be worn down by the mundane, and she'd resent me for holding her back. So we broke up. I knew the moment we reconciled that I'd eventually meet this woman again. Ginger took me to a cafe and handed me a check. You know what I mean, don't you? I grinned as I accepted the check. Thank you for the gift, Auntie. Don't worry, I'll take good care of Victoria. Her expression changed slightly. I'm asking you to leave her. You're not right for her. Don't waste her time. You said that 3 years ago, and we broke up. But 3 years later, she still came back to me. Doesn't that say everything? That's because you seduced my daughter. Ginger clenched her fists. I calmly pushed the check back to her. If you could have convinced Victoria, you wouldn't be here. Whether you accept me or not doesn't matter. The one stuck in the middle is her, not me. You're not the same as 3 years ago. Her words hit home. After 3 years of working in the real world, I had indeed changed. 3 years ago, you didn't even tell Victoria about me. That really surprised me. So I told her I was the one who broke you two apart. She was so furious for the first time. Ginger sighed and slid the check back toward me. You win. Our mother-daughter relationship is already strained. I can't make it worse. Take this as a meeting gift. Goodbye. With that, she hurried off. Just as I was about to leave, Victoria called. Where are you? At a cafe. Did my mom come to see you? I don't like coffee, so you guessed right. Yes, but this time she's willing to give us her blessing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. All I could hear was her quiet breathing. Why didn't you tell me back then? I asked. It's okay. Now that we've weathered the storm, we can finally see the moon. I sat at the cafe for a while before Victoria arrived. She was out of breath and looked a bit flustered. I chuckled softly and said, I'm not going anywhere. Stepping forward, I embraced her. I promised you this time I won't leave again. Victoria's journal, March 16th, a day, etched deeply in my memory. That was the day I realized I might be falling in love with Zach. It all started when he boldly asked for my social media. From that moment on, he barged into my world. I found myself unconsciously following him with my eyes. And when he came closer, I'd feign indifference. Zach was always so full of life. Wherever he went, laughter followed. He used to tell me I was too quiet and that we were a perfect match, his words, not mine. If that's the case, he said, we should be together. March 16th marked the first day of our relationship. That day he leaned on my shoulder and told me I was beautiful. Just standing there makes me like you, he teased. Zach was playful but knew when to draw the line. I had never felt my heart beat so vividly before, as if every emotion was tethered to his every move. Having grown up with divorced parents, I always perceived love as a rare and lofty pursuit, something both hard to find and not particularly necessary. I thought, who needs romance anyway? But Zach shattered my worldview, and a lot more. He tested my limits repeatedly, and yet every time I got mad, he'd playfully apologize, saying, I just wanted to add a little spark to your life. Aren't you tired of being a goddess all the time? He was incredible. Being with him made me feel alive. Throughout college, we were inseparable. I started to believe it was time to take things to the next level, marriage. I wanted to protect our love with the law, to stand by each other forever. So I began planning, trying on wedding dresses, booking venues. It was hectic but filled me with joy. I was counting down the days eagerly. May 28, a day I'll never forget. It was our 137th day together. It poured heavily that day, not exactly ideal weather for a proposal. But everything was ready. I brought Zach to a fancy restaurant. He seemed unusually quiet, which gave me a sinking feeling. I had even prepared a joke to lighten the mood, but he didn't laugh. Instead, he broke up with me. Imagine that, a single joke, and my love life was shattered. I couldn't accept it. I bombarded him with messages, desperate for an explanation. Then came the dreaded red exclamation mark, the sign that our connection was severed. That's when I knew it was really over. For a long time, I couldn't stop wondering what I did wrong. It felt like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I didn't even know where I had failed. Eventually, I left the country. I met many passionate men abroad. One even handed me a card and promised to show me what real fiery love felt like. But I had already experienced it, the kind that burns and freezes you at the same time. I became obsessed with prayer. Back home, Zach and I had prayed to the God of love, but it seemed our prayers had gone unanswered. At the church, the priest told me that with enough sincerity, I could wash away my sins. I thought, perfect, I could use that. But even God didn't seem to hear me. I felt abandoned, starting with Zach's rejection. Zach, the liar. My professor wanted me to stay abroad to continue my studies, but I felt an urge to return. I wanted to bask in the same sunlight as him again. Maybe, just maybe, a breeze might carry a kiss from him. Back in my class there was a mischievous boy named Leo, who coincidentally shared the same last name as Zach. Seeing him reminded me of Zach constantly, even though they had nothing to do with each other. Leo was a troublemaker, but his expressions bore a striking resemblance to Zach's. I never thought I'd see Zach again. When I did, I tried to suppress my emotions, to not lose my composure in front of him. In those 3 years, I learned a lot. Zach's silly thumb doodles, his way of pretending to be indifferent even when he cared deeply, just like me pretending not to care when I did. In the end, I realized our relationship didn't fail because of anything specific. It simply ran its course. He didn't want me anymore, plain and simple. But I couldn't stand the idea of him being with someone else. It made me jealous. I envied anyone who got to have dinner with him, and I resented anyone who tried to get close to me. One day, Mr. Zhang somehow found my address and refused to leave my house. Out of courtesy, I didn't kick him out, I just called the police. After that, I decided to move. I bought an apartment across from Zach's, paying a premium for it. Watching him open his door gave me a strange sense of peace. December 25. Another day etched in my memory. A roller coaster of emotions. I was terrified I'd never have another chance. Luckily, Zach didn't give up on me. April 16th, the day of his proposal. November 30th, the day we got married. I circled those dates on my calendar. From across the room, Zach teased me. "Victoria, you're so old-fashioned. Who even uses calendars anymore? Can't you just remember it in your head?" "Of course not," I shot back. "What if someone tries to deny it later?" We both laughed.